The air in the belly of the SS Vanguard tasted of sulfur, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of impending failure. 80 feet below the waterline, the concept of day or night was irrelevant. There was only the rhythmic, deafening worship of the massive MAN B&W diesel engine, a 3-story cathedral of iron that drove the 50,000-ton freighter through the North Atlantic. For Lucas Thorne, a 26-year-old junior mechanic with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints, the engine room usually felt like a sanctuary, a place where logic ruled and problems had tangible solutions. But tonight, the sanctuary felt like a tomb. Lucas stood on the grate of the upper catwalk, his boots vibrating against the steel mesh. He wiped a mixture of sweat and condensation from his forehead with a rag that was already black with oil. His eyes were fixed on the analog pressure gauge of turbine number 3. The needle wasn't just climbing. It was trembling, vibrating violently against the red limit peg, as if trying to break through the glass. The sound of the turbine was wrong. It wasn't the deep, chest-thrumming hum of healthy machinery. It was a high-pitched whine, a mechanical scream that set Lucas's teeth on edge. "She's singing soprano again, Chief," Lucas shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the pistons. He didn't need to look down to know that Chief Engineer Elias Miller was standing at the control console, his face bathed in the sickly green glow of the monitors. Miller was a man carved from the same granite as the coastlines he had sailed past for 40 years. He moved with a slow, deliberate heaviness, climbing the ladder to join Lucas on the catwalk. He didn't look at the digital readouts on his tablet. He looked at the machine. He placed a gloved hand on the housing of the turbine. He closed his eyes, feeling the heat radiating through the insulation. "The relief valve is stuck," Miller said, his voice gravelly and calm, a stark contrast to the shrieking metal. "The bypass isn't engaging. The pressure is building back into the manifold." "I told the bridge at 0800 hours," Lucas said, fighting the rising panic in his chest. "I told them we needed to throttle down. If we keep running at 18 knots with a stuck valve, something's going to give." Miller sighed, a sound that seemed to deflate his entire frame. He pulled a folded piece of paper from the pocket of his oil-stained coveralls and handed it to Lucas. It was a printout of an email, stamped with the sleek corporate logo of Aethelgard Shipping. "Priority, flash, from Director Vance to CPT Hargrave. Delivery schedule. Current trajectory puts Vanguard 12 hours behind schedule. Late fees are unacceptable. Maintain flank speed. Do not throttle down for minor maintenance. Engineering to bypass safety governors if necessary. Get the cargo to Newark by Tuesday." Lucas read it twice, the words blurring slightly as the ship heaved. The floor beneath them tilted, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, then slowly righted itself. The storm outside was getting worse. "Minor maintenance? Chief, this isn't a clogged filter. That turbine is a bomb." "I know, kid." Miller took the paper back, crumbling it in his fist. "But Hargrave is looking at his pension, and Vance is looking at his quarterly bonus. We are just the grease in the gears." The ship shuddered violently, a groan of tortured steel echoing through the hull. Somewhere above them, loose tools clattered across the deck plates. The intercom on the wall buzzed, the static-laced voice of the first mate cutting in. "Engineering report. We're taking heavy swells. Captain wants to know why we're losing RPMs on the port shaft." Miller grabbed the handset, his knuckles white. "Tell the captain that port shaft is the least of his worries. Turbine 3 is critical. If we don't dump pressure now, we're going to lose the casing. I'm shutting it down. Negative engineering. Captain's orders are standing. Maintain speed. We are trying to outrun the squall line. If we slow down, the waves will broadside us. Keep her running, Miller." The line went dead. Miller stared at the handset for a long moment before slamming it back into the cradle. He turned to Lucas, his eyes hard and clear. "Come with me." They descended the ladder, sliding down the rails to the main control deck. Miller walked past the banks of blinking computers, ignoring the flashing amber warnings on the screens. He went straight to the heavy steel desk bolted to the floor in the corner of the room. He unlocked the drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. The cover was worn, the corners battered. It was the mechanical logbook. In an age of cloud computing and automated telemetry, Miller insisted on the old ways. He opened it to the current date, October 12th. He picked up a heavy fountain pen. "What are you doing, Chief?" Lucas asked, glancing nervously at the steam venting from the overhead pipes. "Making sure the ghosts have a voice," Miller muttered. He began to write, his hand moving furiously. 23:45 hours. Sea State 8. Turbine 3 governor failed. Relief valve seized. Corporate directive from Vance overrides safety protocols. Captain refuses shutdown. Hull integrity at risk due to excessive vibration. God help us. Miller blotted the ink, closed the book, and looked at Lucas. "Take this." Lucas blinked. "What?" "Take it." Miller shoved the book into Lucas's chest. "There's a dry bag in the emergency locker. Double seal it. Put it in the aft wall safe, the titanium one behind the halon tanks. It's the only safe on this tub rated for deep pressure survival." "Chief, you're scaring me. We can fix this. We can vent the pressure manually if we just—" "There is no fixing this, Lucas," Miller roared, the first time Lucas had ever heard him raise his voice in anger. "Listen to the ship. She's crying." As if on cue, a deafening crack echoed through the chamber, louder than a gunshot. A bolt, the size of a fist, sheared off the turbine casing and flew across the room, embedding itself in the steel bulkhead inches from Lucas's head. Steam exploded into the room. It wasn't the gentle mist of a kettle. It was superheated, high-pressure vapor that blinded them instantly. The heat was a physical blow. The screaming of the turbine shifted into a chaotic grinding, like a blender chewing on rocks. "Get back." Miller shoved Lucas hard, sending him stumbling toward the heavy watertight door. "Jack!" Lucas screamed. Jack, the 19-year-old oiler, was on the lower level near the sump pumps. Through the swirling white fog, Lucas saw a shadow move. He saw Jack scrambling up the ladder, his face a mask of terror. But before Jack could reach the landing, the turbine casing gave way. The explosion knocked the wind out of Lucas, throwing him backward against the control panels. For a moment, the world was nothing but ringing silence and white light. When his vision cleared, the air was thick with black smoke and the copper smell of blood. The side of the hull where the turbine had been mounted was gone. In its place was a jagged maw of torn steel, and through it, the Atlantic Ocean was pouring in. It didn't look like water. It looked like a solid black piston, punching into the engine room with the force of a freight train. The freezing water hit the superheated engines, causing secondary explosions of steam that seared the air. "Seal the door." Miller was screaming, his face bloodied, dragging himself up from the floor. He was limping, one leg dragging uselessly behind him. "We have to get Jack," Lucas yelled, scrambling to his feet, ignoring the agony in his ribs. "Jack is gone, son." Miller grabbed Lucas by the collar of his jumpsuit, hauling him toward the aft exit. "Look." Lucas looked down into the pit. The lower level was already underwater. The water was rising with terrifying speed, swirling with oil and debris. There was no sign of the kid. The ship lurched violently to starboard. The lights flickered, died, and then the emergency red lighting kicked in, bathing the nightmare in a bloody hue. The alarm klaxons finally began to sound, a harsh, rhythmic whooping that signaled general quarters. "The book!" Miller shouted, pointing to the book Lucas was still clutching in his death grip. "The safe! Now!" Lucas moved on pure instinct. He stumbled toward the aft bulkhead, where the heavy titanium safe was welded between two structural ribs. His hands shook so badly he could barely work the combination. Left 40, right 10, left 25. The door clicked open. Lucas shoved the leather book into a yellow waterproof emergency bag, sealed it tight, and threw it into the dark metal box. He slammed the safe door and spun the locking wheel until it crunched. "It's done," Lucas yelled. "Go. Get to the life rafts." Miller had positioned himself at the manual override for the watertight door leading to the crew quarters. The electric motors had failed, The door had to be cranked shut to prevent the water from flooding the rest of the ship immediately. "Come on, Chief." Lucas grabbed Miller's arm. Miller pulled away. He looked at the rising water. It was already at their knees, freezing cold, swirling around the batteries. The water was mixing with diesel fuel, creating a slick, toxic sludge. "I can't make the climb, Lucas," Miller said, gesturing to his broken leg. Bone was visible through the fabric. "Someone has to hold the hydraulic lock open while you get through, or the pressure differential will seal us both in." "No, I'm not leaving you." "You are leaving." Miller shoved him through the open frame of the door. The ship groaned again, tilting further. The angle was steep now, almost 30 degrees. "You survive, Lucas. You survive and you tell them what Vance did. You tell them about the valve. You get that book back. Elias, go." Miller grabbed the heavy iron wheel of the door mechanism. He looked at Lucas one last time, his eyes filled with a strange, sad peace. "Don't let them lie about us." Miller spun the wheel. The heavy steel door slid shut between them. Lucas watched the face of his mentor disappear, inch by inch, until the locks engaged with a final, tomb-like thud. Lucas was alone in the corridor. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through the shock. He turned and ran. The corridor was tilted uphill. He had to use the handrails to pull himself forward. The lights were flickering out. He could hear the screams of other crew members echoing from the decks above. He scrambled up the central stairwell. The ship was dying. He could feel it in the way the floor dropped out from under him as the bow pitched down. He reached the weather deck and was immediately hammered by the storm. The wind was a physical force, tearing at his clothes. Rain lashed his face like buckshot. The Vanguard was listing heavily to starboard, her rail already underwater. Giant waves, 30 feet high, crashed over the deck, sweeping containers into the sea like children's toys. "Over here," a voice screamed. Two crew members were struggling with a life raft canister on the port side. Lucas ran toward them, slipping on the wet steel. Before he could reach them, the ship shuddered with a massive, tectonic groan. The boilers had exploded. The deck buckled. Lucas was thrown into the air. He hit the railing hard, ribs cracking, and tumbled over the side. The shock of the water was absolute. It wasn't just cold. It was a vacuum that sucked the heat and life out of him in seconds. He gasped, swallowing a mouthful of salt water and oil. He kicked wildly, his heavy boots dragging him down. "Swim. Swim or die." He clawed his way to the surface, breaking through the oily scum, gasping for air. The waves tossed him like a cork. He wiped his eyes and looked back. The SS Vanguard, the Leviathan of steel, was pointing toward the sky. Her stern rose high out of the water, the propeller still slowly turning in the air. For a moment, she hung there, silhouetted against the lightning. Then, with a terrifying rush of escaping air, she slid backward. She went down fast. The suction tugged at Lucas's legs, dragging him toward the vortex. He swam with everything he had, screaming into the darkness, fighting the ocean itself. He grabbed onto a wooden pallet drifting by. He hauled himself halfway onto it, shivering uncontrollably. He watched the last of the lights beneath the water fade into the abyss. The ocean swallowed the ship whole. Silence returned to the Atlantic. A heavy, oppressive silence broken only by the wind. Lucas laid his head on the wet wood, his body numb, his mind fracturing. The cold began to seep into his bones, slowing his heart. He closed his eyes, and all he could see was the steel door closing. All he could hear was Miller's voice. "Don't let them lie." He drifted in the black water, a speck of life in an infinite graveyard, waiting for a dawn that felt like it would never come. He didn't know how long he drifted. Time lost its meaning. There was only the cold, and the promise he had made to a dead man. The transition from the freezing black hell of the Atlantic to the blinding white purgatory of the recovery room was not a waking up, but a violent resurfacing. Lucas Thorne gasped, his body arching off the mattress, his lungs clawing for air that was too dry, too clean, and smelled sharply of antiseptic and floor wax. There was no roar of the ocean, no screaming of twisting metal, only the rhythmic indifference of a heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. He tried to sit up, but his body felt like it had been filled with lead shot. His ribs were taped tight, a dull ache radiating through his chest with every breath, and his skin burned with the phantom sensation of the freezing water. A nurse appeared instantly at his side, a blur of blue scrubs and professional detachment. She didn't speak. She simply pressed a button on the foredrip, and a cold numbness flooded his veins, dragging him back down into a chemical twilight where he could see Elias Miller's face behind his eyelids, mouthing words he couldn't hear. When he woke again, the light was different. The gray, diffuse light of a rainy New York afternoon filtering through heavy blinds. The room was not a standard hospital ward. It was a private suite, spacious and silent, appointed with leather chairs and mahogany accents that tried to disguise the medical equipment. It felt less like a place of healing and more like a holding cell in a five-star hotel. Lucas pulled the oxygen cannula from his nose and pushed himself up. His personal effects were gone. His clothes, his boots, the cheap digital watch he'd bought in reckless optimism before the voyage. All gone. The door opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. A man walked in. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Lucas made in a year. His hair was silver, perfectly coiffed, and his face was a mask of practiced, sorrowful concern. It was a face Lucas had seen on company newsletters and holiday greeting videos. Julian Vance, the director of operations for Aethelgard Shipping. "Mr. Thorne," Vance said softly, closing the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking shut echoed with a finality that made Lucas's stomach turn. "Thank God. We were beginning to worry." Lucas tried to speak, but his voice was a rusted hinge. He coughed, tasting bile. "Where?" "New York Presbyterian. The private wing." Vance moved to the bedside, pouring a glass of water from a crystal carafe. He held it out, not quite touching Lucas, maintaining a sanitary distance. "The Coast Guard fished you out 48 hours ago. You were hypothermic, dehydrated, and suffering from shock. You're lucky to be alive, son. Truly." Lucas took the glass, his hands trembling so violently the water sloshed over the rim. He drank greedily. The others? Miller? Jack? Vance's expression shifted, a subtle tightening of the jaw that simulated grief. He pulled a chair close and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I'm afraid you're the only one from the engineering crew, Lucas. 2 deckhands were picked up by a tanker near the Azores. That's it. 3 out of 27. The number hit Lucas like a physical blow. 24 dead. Miller. The kid, Jack. The cook who made terrible stew on Tuesdays. All gone." The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating. "The ship?" Lucas whispered, the memory of the explosion flashing in his mind. "The valve. Did you tell them about the valve?" Vance paused. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a slim, silver voice recorder. He placed it on the bedside table. "Lucas, we need to talk about what happened. The insurance adjusters, the Coast Guard, the NTSB, they are all asking questions. I'm here to help you get your story straight before they tear you apart. You've been through a severe trauma. Memory can be slippery." "My memory is fine," Lucas said, a spark of anger cutting through the sedation. "Turbine 3. The relief valve was stuck. Miller emailed you. He told you it was going to blow, and you ordered us to bypass the safety governors. You wanted to save the schedule." Vance didn't flinch. He looked at Lucas with the pity one might show a confused child. "Lucas, I know you're angry. You're grieving. But those are serious accusations. And they are factually incorrect. I saw the email." Lucas pushed himself up further, wincing as his ribs protested. "Miller showed me the printout. Priority flash. Maintain flank speed. That was you." Vance sighed, standing up and walking to the window. He parted the blinds with 2 fingers, looking out at the weeping city skyline. "We've pulled the server logs, Lucas. We checked the satellite comms history. There was no such email. There was no report of a valve failure. The telemetry from the Vanguard showed all systems green until the moment the storm overwhelmed the vessel. "That's a lie," Lucas hissed. Miller wrote it down. He logged it. Vance turned, his silhouette dark against the gray window. "The digital logs are clean. The only thing the data shows is a series of erratic manual overrides initiated from the engine room shortly before the hull breach. Errors consistent with panic. Or incompetence." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lucas stared at the man. "You wiped it. You deleted the server records. We are a Fortune 500 company, Lucas. We don't delete federal records." Vance's voice was harder now, the veneer of empathy cracking to reveal the steel beneath. "The narrative is simple because the truth is simple. Captain Hargrave, God rest his soul, drove into a hurricane to pad his arrival time. The engineering team, under extreme stress, made a mistake with the ballast pumps. It's a tragedy, a human tragedy." "It was the turbine," Lucas shouted, his voice cracking. "The casing blew out. It wasn't the ballast. I was there." "You were suffering from nitrogen narcosis and hypothermia," Vance said smoothly, walking back to the bed. "You were hallucinating. The autopsy on the deckhands showed high levels of alcohol in their blood. The narrative, Mr. Thorne, is that this was a rogue crew issue, not a structural one." He reached into his inner pocket again and pulled out a white envelope. He placed it on the blanket next to Lucas's hand. "However," Vance continued, his voice softening back to a purr, "Aethelgard looks after its own. We know you have a history of instability, financial struggles. We know your mother is in assisted living in Jersey and that the bills are piling up. This is a settlement offer. It includes full medical coverage, a generous severance, and a stipend for pain and suffering. It is enough to ensure you never have to work on a ship again. Enough to take care of your mother for the rest of her life." Lucas looked at the envelope. It was thick. He didn't need to open it to know it contained a check with 6 zeros and a non-disclosure agreement that would sew his mouth shut forever. "All you have to do," Vance said, leaning in close, smelling of expensive cologne and peppermint, "is sign the statement. Confirm that Chief Miller was acting erratically, that he had been drinking, that the maintenance logs were falsified to cover up neglect." "You want me to blame Elias?" Lucas felt the blood pounding in his ears. "He died trying to save the ship. He died saving me. He's dead, Lucas. His reputation doesn't matter to him anymore. But your future matters to you. Don't throw it away for a ghost." Lucas closed his eyes. He saw the safe, the titanium wall safe in the chief's office. The book. Miller knew. Miller knew they would do this. That was why he wrote it down. That was why he made Lucas put it in the dry bag. The servers could be wiped. The digital footprint could be scrubbed by a technician in a server room in Zurich. But ink on paper, that was real. That was the anchor. If Vance knew about the book, he wouldn't be here offering money. He would be sending a hit squad. Vance didn't know. He thought the only proof was in Lucas's head. Lucas opened his eyes. He looked at the envelope, then at Vance. He had to play this carefully. If he screamed about the book now, they would never let him leave this room. I need time," Lucas whispered, feigning exhaustion. He let his shoulders slump. Vance studied him for a long moment, his eyes searching for any sign of deception. He saw a broken man in a hospital bed, shivering and pale. He nodded, satisfied. "Of course. Take a day. Rest. But the press is outside, Lucas. They are vultures. We have security at the door to protect you, but we can't hold them off forever. The sooner we sign this, the sooner you can go home and forget this nightmare ever happened." Vance patted Lucas's leg through the blanket, a gesture that felt like a brand, and walked to the door. "Think about your mother, Lucas. Don't be a martyr. Martyrs usually end up dead." The door clicked shut. Lucas waited 10 seconds, then scrambled out of bed. His legs buckled, and he crashed to the floor, biting his lip to keep from screaming. He dragged himself to the small closet where patients' clothes were usually kept. Empty. He went to the bathroom. In the mirror, a stranger stared back. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with red. His face was covered in cuts and bruises. He looked like a madman. Maybe I am, he thought. Maybe Vance is right. Maybe the valve didn't blow. No. He touched the scar on his forehead where the bolt had missed him by inches. That was real. The pain was real. He needed to get out. He needed to find Elena Rossi, if she even remembered him or if she was even real. He had read about her in a magazine months ago, a lawyer who had been disbarred for fighting Aethelgard. It was a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary. The next 24 hours were a blur of sedatives and silence. Lucas refused to sign the papers. He refused to speak to the psychiatrist Vance sent in. He sat in the chair, staring at the rain, building a fortress in his mind. On the third day they released him, not because he was well but because he refused the settlement. Vance didn't come back. Instead, a faceless paralegal handed him a packet of discharge papers and a warning. By refusing the settlement, Mr. Thorne, you are waiving your right to future support. Aethelgard accepts no liability for your injuries. Furthermore, any defamatory statements made against the company will be met with immediate litigation. Lucas walked out of the hospital doors into the gray drizzle of Manhattan. He was wearing a donated tracksuit that was too short for him and a pair of canvas shoes. He had $12 in his pocket that the nurse had found in his jumpsuit. The paparazzi were there, but not for him. They were waiting for a celebrity in the ICU. A few reporters glanced at the ragged man stumbling out, but seeing no story in his hollow eyes, they looked away. Lucas walked. He walked until his legs burned and the hospital was just a white block in the distance. He found a bodega and bought a cheap prepaid phone and a bottle of water. He sat on a wet park bench, his hands shaking as he dialed the number for his mother's nursing home. Hello? The nurse's voice was cheerful. It's Lucas. Is she okay? Oh, Mr. Thorne. We were just about to call you. There's been an issue with the payment for this month. The autopay from the shipping company was canceled this morning, and we received a notification that your insurance has been terminated. Lucas closed his eyes, the rain running down his face like tears. I know. I'll fix it. Just don't move her. Please. We can give you a grace period of 48 hours, Mr. Thorne. After that, per policy, we'll have to initiate a transfer to a state facility. I'll fix it, he lied. He hung up. He sat there for a long time. The city moved around him, indifferent and loud. He felt the weight of the invisible wall Vance had built around him. They had taken his job, his reputation, and now they were coming for his family. They wanted him to break. They wanted him to crawl back to that glass tower and sign the paper. He looked at the phone in his hand. He searched for news of the Vanguard. Headline: Tragedy at SEA. Captain's drunken error sinks Vanguard. Sole survivor hospitalized with psychotic break. The article had a picture of him, an old mugshot from a bar fight 5 years ago, making him look like a criminal. They had already written the script. To the world, he was the villain or the madman. Lucas laughed. A dry, jagged sound. Psychotic break, he muttered. He stood up. The pain in his ribs was a sharp reminder of the truth. He wasn't crazy, and he wasn't alone. He had a ghost. He dialed 411. I need a number for well, she's not a lawyer anymore.
Elena Rossi.
New Jersey. There was no listing for a law office, but there was a listing for a Rossi Marine salvage consultation in Bayonne. Lucas began to walk toward the bus station. He had 48 hours to save his mother, and he had $0. But he had a secret that was worth $500 million sitting 300 meters under the sea. The glass fortress of Aethelgard was high and mighty, but glass shatters. He just needed a rock, and he knew exactly where to find the heaviest rock in the world. As he boarded the bus to New Jersey, Lucas looked back at the skyline. The Aethelgard Tower pierced the clouds, a needle of arrogance. I'm coming for you, he whispered. The bus pulled away, leaving the city behind, carrying a man who had nothing left to lose, heading toward a woman who had already lost everything. The alliance of the damned was about to begin. Bayonne, New Jersey, was where the Industrial Revolution went to die and rust in peace. It was a landscape of skeletal cranes, chemical storage tanks that looked like giant aspirin tablets, and a sky that was permanently bruised purple by the sodium lights of the turnpike. For Elena Rossi, it was purgatory, but it was a purgatory with cheap rent and no bar association ethics committees breathing down her neck. Her kingdom was Rossi Marine Salvage, a glorified scrapyard at the end of a cracked asphalt road that dissolved into the mud of the Kill Van Kull Strait. The rain here didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. Inside the corrugated metal hangar that served as her workshop, the air was thick with the smell of ozone, stale coffee, and the heavy, sweet scent of marine grease. Elena killed the angle grinder, the shriek of metal on metal dying away to leave a ringing silence. She pushed her safety goggles up into her tangled dark hair, wiping a smear of oil from her cheek with the back of a glove. She was 34, but in this light, she looked older. Her eyes, once sharp enough to spot a misplaced comma in a 1,000-page merger agreement, were now rimmed with fatigue and suspicion. She picked up a lukewarm mug of coffee from her workbench, staring at the outboard motor she was rebuilding. It was a Honda 250 seized up by salt and neglect, much like her career. A dog barked outside, Buster, a one-eyed Rottweiler mix who hated everyone, including Elena on most days. Then came the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel, slow and uneven. Elena put the coffee down. She picked up a 24-inch pipe wrench. She didn't get customers this late, and the ones she did get usually wanted things that weren't strictly legal. She walked to the sliding door, cracked it open, and peered out into the drizzle. A man was standing by the chain-link gate. He looked like something the tide had dragged in and rejected. He was wearing a gray tracksuit that was too short for his limbs, soaked through to the skin. His face was a map of bruises, yellow and purple blooming under the pale streetlights, and he was shivering so hard the gate rattled where his hand touched it. "We're closed," Elena shouted, her voice raspy from inhaling metal dust. "Read the sign. No soliciting, no scrapping." "I'm not here for scrap," the man called back. His voice was weak, barely carrying over the wind. "I'm looking for Elena Rossi, the lawyer. She doesn't live here anymore." Elena lied, gripping the wrench tighter. "She died of boredom. Go away. You sued Aethelgard Shipping 3 years ago." The man persisted, not moving. "You represented the dockworkers' union in the class action suit regarding the asbestos lining in the retrofitted hulls. You found the internal memos, but the judge threw them out on a technicality regarding the chain of custody."
Elena froze.
That wasn't public knowledge. The settlement had sealed the details, and the technicality was a bribe paid to a clerk in the records department, something she suspected but could never prove. She slid the door open wider, stepping out into the rain. "Who are you?" "My name is Lucas Thorne," he said, and then his knees seemed to give way. He grabbed the fence to keep from falling. "I was on the Vanguard." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The Vanguard. The news had been wall-to-wall coverage for a week. The drunken captain, the rogue crew, the tragic sinking. "You're the mechanic," she said, lowering the wrench slightly. "The one in the psych ward." "I checked myself out," Lucas said, his teeth chattering. Can I come in? Please, I have nowhere else to go." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the kind that reminded her of the clients she used to represent, the ones who had been chewed up by the system and spit out. She cursed under her breath, a long string of Italian profanity she had learned from her grandfather. "If you bleed on my floor, you're cleaning it up," she said, unlocking the padlock on the gate. Inside the workshop, Lucas sat on a stack of milk crates near the propane space heater, holding a fresh cup of coffee with both hands. He looked small in the cavernous room, surrounded by the skeletons of old boats. Elena leaned against her workbench, arms crossed, the pipe wrench still within easy reach. "You're a fugitive, essentially," Elena said, cutting straight to the point. "You refused the settlement, you walked out of medical care, and I'm guessing you have zero assets because Aethelgard froze everything. Why come to me? I can't practice law. I can't even notarize a parking ticket." "I don't need a lawyer," Lucas said, the heat slowly returning some color to his face. I need a salvage expert. And I need someone who hates Julian Vance as much as I do. Elena's expression hardened at the name. Vance. That slick son of a bitch. He's the one who filed the grievance that got my license suspended. He was at the hospital, Lucas said. He told me the Vanguard sank because of pilot error. He said the digital logs showed no mechanical faults. He offered me $500,000 to sign a paper blaming the chief engineer. Standard playbook? Elena shrugged, though her eyes were intense. Kill the witness with cash. If that fails, kill his character. You're the mentally unstable survivor now. Anything you say is fruit of the poisonous tree. Without evidence, you're just screaming into the wind. Lucas. I have evidence. No, you don't. The ship is at the bottom of the Atlantic. The servers are wiped. The emails are gone. You have memories, and memories don't stand up in court against a team of corporate litigators. Chief Miller kept a paper log, Lucas said. Elena stopped. The workshop went quiet, save for the hum of the heater and the rain drumming on the tin roof. She uncrossed her arms. Say that again. A physical logbook. The mechanical logbook. Old school. Bound in leather. Lucas spoke quickly now, the words tumbling out. Miller didn't trust the cloud. He wrote down the valve failure. He wrote down the override order from Vance. He wrote down the time, the pressure readings, everything. Paper dissolves, Lucas, Elena said, her voice dropping. Salt water and pressure turn paper into pulp in hours. Not this time. He made me put it in a dry bag. Heavy-duty yellow vinyl, double-sealed. And then we locked it in the wall safe in the chief's office. It's a titanium box, welded to the structural ribs. It's rated for fire and deep-pressure immersion. Elena stared at him. Her mind, dormant for years, began to race. She visualized the stern of a cargo ship. The Vanguard broke her back, right? The bow sank first. Yes. The stern went down last. It went down relatively intact. Depth? 300 meters. Maybe 350. On the shelf. Elena turned away, pacing the length of the workshop. She ran her hand along the hull of a rusted trawler. 300 meters is the saturation zone. Technical diving only. Mixed gas. Heliox. You'd need a support vessel, a decompression chamber, or an ROV. It's not a swim in the pool. But it's possible, Lucas pressed. It's there, Elena. The ink on that paper is the only thing in the world that can prove they killed 24 people. Elena stopped pacing. She looked at the poster on her wall, a faded schematic of a commercial diving rig. She had spent the last 3 years fixing engines and rotting in this yard, watching the people who destroyed her life get richer. She felt a spark in her chest, a dangerous, volatile heat she hadn't felt since her last day in court. If that book exists, she said slowly, it's the smoking gun. It bypasses the digital tampering, proves mens rea criminal intent. If Vance ordered the override knowing the risks, it's not negligence. It's manslaughter. Will you help me? Lucas asked. Help you? Lucas, if we go after this, they will come for us. Not with lawyers. With everything they have. Aethelgard protects its stock price like a mother bear protects a cub. They've already taken everything from me, Lucas said. My mom is going to get kicked out of her nursing home in 2 days because they cut my insurance. I don't care what they do to me. I just want them to pay. Elena looked at him, seeing the resolve beneath the fear. She walked over to a metal cabinet, kicked it to unstuck the drawer, and pulled out a bottle of cheap bourbon and 2 dirty glasses. She poured 2 shots. To bad ideas, she said, sliding a glass across the workbench. Lucas took it. To the truth. He drank. The whiskey burned, but it felt grounding. Suddenly, Buster started barking again outside. Not the warning bark from before, but a vicious, snarling attack sound. Then, a yelp and silence. Elena's eyes widened. She slammed the glass down. Lights. Kill the lights. What? Do it. She hissed. Lucas scrambled to the wall switch and slapped it down. The workshop plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the faint orange glow of the heater and the streetlights filtering through the high clear-story windows. Elena moved with practiced stealth, grabbing the pipe wrench again. She motioned for Lucas to get behind the trawler hull. She crept toward the window that looked out onto the yard. A black SUV was idling at the gate. The headlights were off, but the parking lights cast a sinister amber glow on the wet gravel. 2 men were stepping out. They weren't police. They wore dark raincoats and moved with the coordination of soldiers. One of them was holding something long and metallic, a bolt cutter. "They found you," Elena whispered, her voice tight. "How did they find you?" I used a prepaid phone. I called my mom's nursing home," Lucas realized with a jolt of horror. "They must have flagged the number." "Idiot," Elena muttered. But there was no venom in it, only adrenaline. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they cut that lock and come in here to ask questions with a tire iron. What do we do? Call the cops?" Aethelgard owns the Bayonne PD. Half their pension fund is tied up in shipping logistics. If the cops come, they hand you over to Vance and you disappear. Elena looked around the shop. Her eyes landed on the back door, which led to the dock. "We leave," she said. "My stuff." "Leave it. We go now." She grabbed a heavy canvas duffel bag from under her workbench, her go bag, packed years ago when the paranoia was fresh. She threw it to Lucas. "Move." They ran toward the back of the workshop. Elena paused at a breaker box and flipped a switch. The floodlights on the dock outside flared to life. Blindingly bright white LED beams pointed directly at the yard, designed to blind intruders. "That'll buy us 30 seconds, she said. They burst out the back door into the driving rain. The dock was slippery, smelling of dead fish and diesel. Bobbing in the water was the Rusty Gull. It was a 40-foot converted lobster boat, ugly as sin, with peeling paint and a hull that looked like a patchwork quilt of welded steel plates. But to Lucas it looked like a chariot. "Get on board and untie the stern line," Elena shouted, jumping onto the gunwale. She scrambled up to the flying bridge. Lucas nearly slipped as he leaped onto the wet deck. He fumbled with the thick, wet rope cleated to the dock piling. His fingers were numb, but terror made them clumsy. From the workshop, they heard the sound of the metal door being kicked in. Voices shouting. "Clear!" Lucas yelled, throwing the rope onto the deck. The engine of the Rusty Gull coughed, choked, and then roared to life with a cloud of black smoke. It was a loud, unrefined diesel beast, but it sounded powerful. "Hang on!" Elena slammed the throttle forward. The boat lurched, the propeller biting into the black water. They surged away from the dock just as the back door of the workshop flew open. 2 figures ran out onto the pier. Lucas saw the flash of a muzzle, pop-pop, and wood splintered on the railing inches from his hand. "They're shooting!" Lucas screamed, hitting the deck. "They're trying to scare us!" Elena yelled back, spinning the wheel hard to port to navigate the channel markers. "If they wanted us dead, they'd use a rifle, not a handgun." The Gull banked sharply, spray flying over the bow. They wove through the graveyard of rusting barges and tugboats that littered the Kill Van Kull. Elena killed the deck lights, plunging them into darkness again. She navigated by the glow of the radar screen and pure muscle memory. Lucas crawled up the ladder to the wheelhouse. It was warm inside, smelling of old tobacco and brass polish. Elena was gripping the wheel, her knuckles white, her face illuminated by the green sweep of the sonar. "You okay?" she asked, not looking at him. "You saved my life," Lucas breathed, staring out at the receding lights of Bayonne. "Don't thank me yet." Elena checked the fuel gauge. "We're running on half a tank, we have no food, and we just declared war on a multinational corporation with a private security army." She throttled back slightly as they reached the open water of the upper New York Bay. The Statue of Liberty stood in the distance, a pale green ghost in the rain, holding her torch to an empty sky. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked. Elena looked at him. The cynicism in her eyes had been replaced by a grim determination. "You said the safe is titanium, right? Waterproof?" "Yes." "Then we need gear. We need mixed gas. We need a cutter capable of slicing through military-grade steel underwater. And we need to get to the coordinates before they realize we aren't just running away. but running toward the wreck. She pulled a chart from the overhead rack and slammed it onto the dashboard. She tapped a location on the Jersey Shore, further south. I know a guy in Atlantic City. He used to dive for the Navy. He owes me a favor because I kept him out of prison for smuggling. He has the equipment we need. Lucas looked at the chart, then at the dark water ahead. They'll be watching the wreck site, Elena. Vance isn't stupid. If he suspects the logbook is real, he'll have a ship there. Let them watch. Elena smiled, a tight, feral expression. They're looking for a salvage vessel. A big, slow crane ship. They aren't looking for two idiots in a lobster boat held together by duct tape and spite. She pushed the throttle forward again. Go below. There's a bunk in the forward cabin. Get some sleep. You look like hell, and tomorrow, I need you to tell me exactly how to break into that engine room without killing us both. Lucas nodded. He climbed down the companionway steps. The cabin was small, cluttered with charts and tools, but dry. He sat on the narrow bunk, the vibration of the engine humming against his back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the only thing he had saved from the hospital. A small, crumpled photograph of his mother he kept in his wallet. I'm fixing it, Ma, he whispered. Above him, on the bridge, Elena Rossi stared into the rain. She reached for the radio handset, hesitated, then put it back. No radio. Silence was their only shield now. She looked at the radar. A blip was following them far back, but steady. Come on, you bastards, she whispered to the darkness. Let's see who knows the water better. The rusty gull cut through the waves, leaving a frothy wake that disappeared instantly into the night. They were no longer predator and prey. They were ghosts, slipping into the underworld to steal fire from the gods. The chase had begun, but the real battle lay 300 meters down, in the crushing silence where the truth was waiting to be exhaled. The Atlantic City skyline emerged from the mist like a row of broken teeth capped in gold. It was a city of desperate optimism, a place where fortunes were incinerated in the pull of a slot machine lever, and to Lucas Thorne, staring at it from the wheelhouse of the rusty gull, it looked like the perfect place to hide. The neon glow of the casinos, Borgata, Caesars, the Hard Rock, bled into the low-hanging clouds, casting a sickly purple bruised light over the black swells of the inlet. Elena Rossi throttled the engine down. The boat's diesel rumble dropped to a low, gargling idle as they drifted past the rusted pilings of a derelict pier, far away from the polished marinas where the yachts of high rollers bobbed in white plastic rows. This was the Boneyard, a stretch of the Back Bay known for illegal crabbing, stolen jet skis, and people who didn't want to be found. Tie us off on that cleat, Elena commanded, her voice tight with fatigue. She hadn't slept since they fled Bayonne. And keep your head down. Aethelgard has eyes everywhere, but here the eyes are usually too drunk to focus. Lucas scrambled onto the rotting wood of the dock, his movements stiff. The adrenaline of the escape had faded, replaced by a gnawing hunger and the deep, bone-chilling dampness of the sea. He secured the lines, his mechanic's hands working the knots automatically. When he looked up, Elena was already on the dock, shouldering her heavy duffel bag. She looked at him, her face illuminated by the distant strobe of a lighthouse. We need a car, she said, and we need to find the squid before he passes out. They walked along the edges of the city, avoiding the boardwalk proper. The air smelled of salt water, frying grease, and stale beer. They moved through alleyways where stray cats fought over discarded pizza crusts. The glorious noise of the casinos just a distant thrumming bass line in the ground. Elena stopped in front of a building that looked like it had survived a bombing raid. The sign above the door, missing half its neon letters, read, N-Tunes Salve GE and BAT. The windows were painted over with black opacity, peeling at the corners. Wait here, Elena said, putting a hand on Lucas's chest. He doesn't like strangers, and he really doesn't like surprises. Who is he? Lucas whispered, eyeing the security camera mounted above the door. It was a high-end, military-grade model that looked laughably out of place on the rotting facade. His name is Arthur Pendergast. We call him the Squid. He was a saturation diver for the Navy SEALs until he got bent on a retrieval mission in the Yellow Sea. The Navy discharged him. The VA failed him. He started smuggling exotic fish to pay for his pain meds. I defended him when customs caught him with a crate of illegal lionfish. I got the charges dropped on a loophole about international water jurisdiction. He owes me a life. She banged on the metal door. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 2 more. A slot in the door slid open. A pair of bloodshot eyes, magnified by thick glasses, peered out. "Go away," a voice croaked. "We're closed. No bat. No refunds." "Open the door, squid," Elena said, leaning close to the slot. "It's Rossi. I'm cashing in the chit." The eyes widened. The slot slammed shut. There was the sound of heavy deadbolts sliding back. 3 of them. The door groaned open, revealing a cavernous space bathed in the eerie blue light of 100 aquariums. The squid was a small, wiry man who looked like he was made of beef jerky and nervous energy. He wore a stained tank top that revealed arms covered in tattoos of krakens and anchors. He ushered them in and slammed the door, locking it instantly. "You're supposed to be dead," Squid said, pointing a grease-stained finger at Elena. "I saw the news. Aethelgard has a team sweeping the tri-state area. They put a bounty on a rogue female accomplice. 50 grand, Rossi. You're worth a Lexus. Nice to see you too, Arthur." Elena walked past him, heading toward a massive tank where a shark circled endlessly. "I need gear. Deep water gear." Squid laughed, a high-pitched sound that bounced off the glass tanks. "Deep water? You get seasick in a bathtub. What do you need? Scuba? Nitrox? Heliox?" Lucas spoke up from the shadows near the door. Squid spun around, his hand instinctively going to the small of his back, where a bulge suggested a pistol. He squinted at Lucas. "Who's the stray?" "This is Lucas Thorne," Elena said. "The survivor." Squid froze. He looked from Lucas to Elena, the gears turning in his frantic mind. "The Vanguard kid? The one who blew up the ship?" "I didn't blow it up." Lucas stepped into the blue light. "And we're going back to get the proof." Squid stared at him for a long 10 seconds, then let out a low whistle. He walked over to a cluttered workbench covered in regulators and tangled hoses. He picked up a rag and started wiping his hands. "You're not just crazy. You're suicidal. The Vanguard is sitting at 320 meters. That's the crush zone. You go down there on standard air, your nervous system fries in 2 minutes. Oxygen toxicity will seizure you out before you even see the wreck. That's why we need the heliox," Elena said, leaning against a tank. "And rebreathers. Closed circuit. No bubbles. We need to be invisible." Squid shook his head, muttering to himself. "Invisible, right? Because Aethelgard doesn't have sonar. Look, even if I give you the gas, you can't just swim down there. You need a bell. You need a pressurized transfer system. You freedive that depth, you have to decompress for 2 days on the way up. You don't have enough gas in the world for that." "We aren't staying down," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "It's a bounce dive, in and out. 20 minutes bottom time. We calculate the decompression stops. We stage tanks on the anchor line." 20 minutes? Squid scoffed. "At that depth? That's insane. You'll have 5 minutes of clear thinking before the helium tremors set in. And if you panic, you're dead. If you ascend too fast, your blood turns to fizz. Dead." "I know the risks," Lucas said. "But I know the engine room. I know exactly where the safe is. I can do it." Squid looked at Elena. "He's serious?" "Dead serious," Elena said. "And we need a cutter. Plasma torch. The door is warped." Squid sighed. He walked over to a heavy steel cabinet in the back. He unlocked it, revealing rows of pristine, high-tech diving equipment that looked like it belonged on a spacecraft, not in a fish shop. "I have 2 -16 Malawian Quatches rebreathers," Squid said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Modded for extreme depth. I have the helium mix. I have the heating suits because at that depth the water is 33 degrees, and you'll die of hypothermia in 10 minutes without active heating. He pulled out a heavy, cylindrical device that looked like a futuristic rifle. And this is a Broco tactical torch. Magnesium rods. Burns at 10,000 degrees. Cuts steel like butter underwater. But it eats oxygen. You use this, you watch your PPO2 levels, or you blow yourself up. How much? Elena asked. For you? Nothing. Squid slammed the cabinet shut. Because if you pull this off, Aethelgard goes down, and I hate those corporate fascists. But you need to pay for the gas. Helium isn't cheap. And I need you to take something for me. What? A drive. Squid pulled a small USB stick from his pocket. Encrypted files on the local port authority corruption. If you make it back, you leak this too. Burn the whole city down. Deal. Elena took the drive. But there's a problem, Squid said, looking at a monitor on his desk. It showed a live feed of the alleyway. You're not the only ones shopping tonight. On the screen, a black sedan rolled slowly down the alley. It didn't look like a police car. It looked like a shark prowling a reef. They tracked the boat? Lucas asked, panic rising. Maybe not the boat, Squid said. Maybe they tracked your face. Did you stop anywhere? Gas station? ATM? No, Elena said. We came straight here. The cameras, Lucas realized. The marina. The High Rollers marina we passed. They have facial recognition. If Aethelgard tapped into the city grid. Then they know you're in Atlantic City. Squid grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing gear into it. Tanks, masks, the torch. You have to move. Now, my back door opens to the canal. I have a skiff. I can run the gear to your boat. You two need to split up and meet me there. If you go together, you're a target. No, Elena said. We stick together. Rossi, listen to me. Squid snapped. If they corner you on the boat, it's over. I'll take the gear. You draw them off. Lead them to the boardwalk, lose them in the crowd. Then circle back to the boneyard. Go. He shoved the heavy bag into his own arms and kicked open a trapdoor in the floor. I'll meet you at the Rusty Gull in 20 minutes. Don't die. Squid disappeared into the dark crawlspace. Elena grabbed Lucas's arm. Come on. They burst out of the front door, back into the mist. The black sedan was at the end of the block, idling. As soon as they stepped out, its headlights flared, high beams, blinding white. Run!
Elena yelled.
They sprinted down the alley, splashing through puddles. The sedan's tires squealed as it accelerated. The boardwalk! Elena shouted, taking a sharp left turn through a gap in a chain-link fence. They scrambled over a pile of discarded lumber and burst out onto the wooden planks of the famous Atlantic City boardwalk. Even at 2 a.m., the boardwalk was alive. Drunks stumbled out of bars. Couples argued over lost money. Street performers played saxophones for loose change. The noise was a physical wall, slot machine jingles, pop music, laughter. Elena and Lucas blended into the crowd, keeping their heads down. They walked fast, weaving between tourists. Don't look back, Elena whispered. Lucas looked back. 2 men in dark raincoats were pushing through the crowd, 50 yards behind. They weren't running, just walking with terrifying purpose. One of them tapped an earpiece. They're on us, Lucas said. Under the pier, Elena commanded. We lose them in the shadows. She vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet onto the soft, wet sand below. Lucas followed, landing hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Under the boardwalk, the world was a different kind of dark. It was a forest of wooden pillars, crisscrossed with bracing beams. The light from above filtered down in thin, dusty slats. It smelled of rot and sea spray. The sound of footsteps on the planks above sounded like thunder. They ran through the maze of pillars, heading toward the waterline. There, a voice shouted from the darkness ahead. A third man stepped out from behind a concrete piling. He held a taser, the prongs arcing with blue electricity. He wasn't a cop. He was a contractor, a cleaner. Mr. Thorne. The man smiled, his teeth yellow in the gloom. Mr. Vance sends his regards. He really wants you to sign that paper. Lucas stopped, his boots sinking into the wet sand. Elena was 5 steps ahead. She turned, seeing the man blocking their path. "Get out of the way," Elena warned, reaching into her pocket for a heavy wrench she had grabbed from the boat. "Put the tool down, honey," the man sneered, stepping forward. "Or I cook him first." He lunged at Lucas. Lucas didn't think, he reacted. The months of hauling heavy chains in the engine room, the rage of losing Miller, the fear of the last few days. It all coalesced into a single violent impulse. As the man thrust the taser forward, Lucas didn't back away. He stepped into the reach. He grabbed the man's wrist with both hands, twisting it violently outward. The taser fired, the prongs hitting a wooden pillar and sparking wildly. The man grunted, surprised by the mechanic's grip strength. He tried to knee Lucas in the stomach, but Lucas slammed his forehead into the man's nose. A crude, desperate headbutt. There was a sickening crunch. The man staggered back, blood spurting. But he didn't fall. He pulled a knife from his belt. "You little..." Clang. Elena swung the pipe wrench with the force of a battering ram. Connected with the side of the man's knee. The joint shattered. The man screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the crashing waves and the music above. He collapsed into the sand, writhing. "Don't stop!" Elena grabbed Lucas, pulling him away from the fallen man. His friends heard that. They sprinted toward the surf, splashing through the freezing foam, running parallel to the water until the boardwalk ended and the dark marshland of the inlet began. They reached the marina 10 minutes later, lungs burning, legs heavy as lead. The Rusty Gull was there, engine idling. Squid was on the deck, securing the last of the tanks. He looked up as they scrambled onto the boat. "You look like you went 12 rounds, Squid observed, seeing the blood on Lucas's forehead. "We need to go. Now," Elena gasped, untying the lines. "Did you lose them?" "We broke one of them," Lucas said, wiping the blood from his eyes. "But the others are coming." As if to answer him, headlights swept across the parking lot of the marina. 3 cars this time. "Go, go, go," Squid yelled, jumping off the boat back onto the dock. "You're not coming?" Lucas asked. "I'm the distraction," Squid grinned, pulling a flare gun from his belt. "I'm gonna lead them on a merry chase through the marshes. Besides, I get seasick. Get that book, kid. Make them bleed." He fired a red flare into the sky, directly over the approaching cars, then took off running into the tall reeds. Elena slammed the throttle. The Rusty Gull roared, the screw churning the mud. The boat surged backward, then spun around, pointing its bow toward the open ocean. Lucas stood on the stern, watching the shore. He saw the cars stop. Men got out, watching the boat disappear into the mist. They didn't shoot. They were too far and the fog was too thick. The lights of Atlantic City began to fade, shrinking into a cluster of glittering stars on the horizon. The water turned from the murky brown of the bay to the deep, terrifying black of the Atlantic. The swells grew larger, lifting the boat and dropping it with rhythmic thuds. Elena didn't slow down. She pushed the old engine to its limit. She turned on the GPS, punching in the coordinates Lucas had memorized. 39 degrees north, 72 degrees west. "We're crossing the 3-mile limit," Elena shouted over the engine noise. "We're in international waters now. No laws out here but maritime salvage." Lucas walked into the wheelhouse. He looked at the pile of high-tech gear Squid had left them. The rebreathers looked like alien skulls. The tanks of heliox hissed softly. "It's real now," Lucas said, the trembling in his hands finally stopping. "It was always real," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "Get some rest, Lucas. Check the gear. Read the manuals. Because when the sun comes up, we arrive at the grave." Lucas looked out at the ocean. Somewhere out there, 300 meters down, in the crushing dark, Elias Miller was waiting. And so was the truth. He touched the bruise on his forehead. He felt strangely calm. The fear of being hunted was gone, replaced by the cold, singular focus of the mission. "I'm ready," he whispered. The Rusty Gull plowed forward, a tiny speck of defiance against the infinite night, heading into the heart of the abyss. The dawn did not break over the Atlantic so much as it bruised the sky, a creeping transition from charcoal black to the color of a healing hematoma. The ocean was a vast, undulating sheet of hammered lead, indifferent to the tiny speck of the rusty gull bobbing on its surface, 70 miles off the coast of New Jersey. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic slap of water against the fiberglass hull and the low, nervous idle of the generator on the aft deck. Lucas Thorne stood on the dive platform, the weight of the equipment pressing him down into the non-slip grating. He felt less like a man and more like a spacecraft designed for a hostile planet. The -16 Malawian Quatch's rebreather unit strapped to his back was a dense carapace of carbon fiber and circuitry, scrubbing his exhaled carbon dioxide and recycling it, mixing it with the precious helium and oxygen stored in the twin tanks. He wore a dry suit that was less clothing and more armor, thick neoprene pumped full of argon gas for insulation, plugged into a battery pack on his hip that powered a web of heating elements against his skin. At 300 meters, the water temperature was barely above freezing. Without the active heating, he would be dead from hypothermia in 12 minutes, long before he drowned. Elena Rossi stood in front of him, her face pale in the gray morning light, her eyes dark with a lack of sleep and a surplus of fear. She was checking the connections on his harness for the third time, her fingers trembling slightly as she tightened the straps. "Oxygen sensors are calibrating," she said, her voice sounding thin in the open air. "Scrubber duration is 4 hours. Your bailout gas, the open-circuit tank on your side, gives you 10 minutes at depth. That's it, Lucas. If the rebreather fails, you have 10 minutes to switch and start an ascent, or I become part of the reef." Lucas finished for her. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distorted by the full-face mask he had just pulled down but not yet sealed. "Don't joke," Elena snapped, locking the dive computer onto his wrist. "The descent line is weighted. The anchor is holding. You go down the line. You don't deviate. The current down there can be 2 knots. If you let go of the line in the dark, you'll never find the ship." Lucas looked past her at the water. It looked thick, impenetrable. Somewhere down there, in the crushing dark, was the tomb of the Vanguard. And Elias Miller. "I'm ready," Lucas said. He wasn't. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct in his mammalian brain was screaming at him to step back, to stay in the air, to flee. But the memory of Vance's smile in the hospital room, the image of his mother's nursing home eviction notice, and the ghost of Miller pushed him forward. "Check your comms," Elena said. She put on a headset plugged into the acoustic through-water communication system. Lucas pressed the button on his mask. "Radio check. You hear me?" "Loud and clear." "You sound like a duck." She managed a weak smile. The helium in the mix made his voice pitch shift upward. "Remember, Lucas, the pressure causes high-pressure nervous syndrome. Tremors, dizziness, nausea. Passes. Just breathe. Don't panic. Panic kills more divers than equipment failure." "I'll be fine," Lucas lied. He gripped the heavy brocothermal torch clipped to his belt. "Turn on the gas." Elena reached behind him and twisted the valves. A sharp hiss, then a steady, rhythmic clicking as the solenoid valves of the rebreather began to fire, injecting oxygen into the loop. Lucas took a breath. The gas was dry and tasted metallic. "Good luck," Elena whispered. She stepped back. Lucas shuffled to the edge of the platform. He looked at the horizon one last time. There were no ships visible, but he knew they were out there. Aethelgard was hunting. He had to be fast. He took a step. Gravity took over. The splash was violent, an explosion of white foam, and then silence.
Instant, crushing silence.
Lucas purged the air from his buoyancy wing and grabbed the anchor line. He began to fall. The first 50 feet were blue, a light, ethereal turquoise that felt welcoming. But as he passed the 100-foot mark, the color drained away. The red spectrum vanished first, then the yellow, leaving only a monochromatic world of deep, bruised indigo. The pressure began to squeeze his dry suit, the material wrinkling against his skin like shrink wrap. He tapped the inflator valve, shooting a burst of argon into the suit to equalize the space, taking the squeeze off his chest. Down, down, down. At 200 feet, the indigo faded to black. A total, suffocating blackness that was heavier than any night sky. Lucas reached up and clicked on his primary dive lights. Two beams of high-intensity LED lights sliced through the water, illuminating nothing but the endless white rope running down into the abyss and the particles of marine snow. Organic debris drifting down like dust in an attic. He checked his computer. Depth, 150 meters. He was halfway there. Suddenly, his hands began to shake. A violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled the flashlight against the rope. His vision blurred, the numbers on his wrist computer dancing and doubling. HPNS. The helium rushing into his tissues was exciting his nervous system. He felt a wave of nausea roll over him, threatening to make him vomit into his mask. Stop, he told himself. Just breathe. He hooked his arm around the rope and hung there in the void, closing his eyes. He forced his breathing to slow. In 2, 3. 2, 3. The tremors subsided to a manageable vibration. The nausea faded to a dull ache. He opened his eyes. The darkness was still there, waiting. Lucas! Elena's voice crackled in his ear, tinny and distant. Telemetry shows you stopped. You okay? Just adjusting, Lucas said, his voice high and squeaky. Continuing descent. He resumed the fall. The cold began to creep in now, a subtle thief stealing the heat from his fingertips and toes despite the electric vest. The water pressure was now over 400 pounds per square inch. He was a soft bag of water and bone falling into a hydraulic press. At 280 meters, the rope began to angle sharply. The current. It was pulling him sideways. He gripped the line tighter, his muscles burning. And then he saw it. It emerged from the gloom like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. The stern section of the SS Vanguard. It was sitting upright, embedded deep in the silt of the continental shelf. The massive propeller, the size of a two-story house, was half buried in the mud. The white letters of the ship's name were visible on the hull, crusted with the beginnings of barnacle growth but still legible. Vanguard. Seeing it hit Lucas harder than the pressure. This was where he had smoked cigarettes on the fantail. This was where he had watched the sunset. Now it was a ghost ship, a monolith of dead steel in a graveyard of silence. He swam over the railing of the aft deck. The familiarity was horrifying. A deck chair was still wedged in the corner. A fire hose station, door flapping open in the current, looked like a gaping mouth. I'm on the deck, Lucas said. Heading for the superstructure. Copy, Elena said. Watch your time, Lucas. You have 18 minutes of bottom time before your decompression obligation becomes unmanageable. Lucas kicked his fins, gliding through the water. He didn't swim, he flew. He moved toward the heavy steel door that led into the engineering block. It was closed, the wheel dogged down. He grabbed the wheel and tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. The pressure and the impact had warped the frame. Door is jammed, Lucas said. Using the torch. He unclipped the Broco torch. He struck the ignition rod against the striker plate attached to his thigh. A brilliant, blinding flare of white light exploded in the darkness. The torch burned at 10,000 degrees, a magnesium sun in his hand. The water around the tip boiled instantly, creating a violent, bubbling cauldron of steam. He pressed the rod against the hinges of the door. The metal didn't just melt. It vaporized. Molten steel sprayed out in showers of orange sparks that died instantly in the water. He cut through the top hinge, then the bottom. The noise was deafening, a roar that vibrated through his skull. With a final kick, the heavy door groaned and fell inward, kicking up a cloud of silt that reduced visibility to zero. Lucas waited, hovering, letting the current clear the dust. Slowly, the interior of the ship revealed itself. He swam inside. The corridor was tilted at a 15-degree angle. Wires hung from the ceiling like jungle vines. Light fixtures floated at the ends of their conduits. He navigated the maze, pulling himself along the handrails, heading deeper, down toward the chief engineer's office on the upper platform of the engine room. He reached the engine room door. It was open, blown open by the explosion. Lucas shined his light inside. The cavernous space was a nightmare of twisted metal. The turbine housing, the one that had failed, was a jagged flower of torn steel. The catwalks were mangled. And there, floating near the ceiling, was a boot. Just a boot. Lucas looked away, swallowing the bile in his throat. Focus. The office. He swam up, or what felt like up, toward the control room glass. The glass was shattered. He carefully maneuvered through the frame, avoiding the jagged shards that could slice his dry suit open and kill him in seconds. The chief's office was a wreck. The desk was overturned. Papers, reduced to white pulp, drifted like snow. But the wall behind the desk was intact. And there it was. The titanium safe. It was exactly where Miller had said it would be. Welded to the structural rib. A gray metal box with a mechanical dial. Lucas swam toward it. He reached out his hand. Suddenly, the water around him lit up. It wasn't his light. It was a harsh, piercing halogen beam coming from behind him, from the engine room below. Lucas spun around, his heart stopping. Rising through the shattered floor of the engine room was a machine. It was black and yellow, the size of a small car, with 4 thrusters humming with a high-pitched electric whine. A camera lens, like a giant unblinking eye, swiveled to focus on him. 2 mechanical manipulator arms, equipped with hydraulic claws and a circular saw, extended from its chassis. An ROV, a Triton-class heavy work robot. Lucas! Elena screamed in his ear. Sonar contact. Something just dropped from the surface directly above you. A fast drop. It's here, Lucas whispered, backing against the wall safe. It's an ROV, Aethelgard. The robot didn't hesitate. It wasn't programmed to negotiate. It was being piloted by a human operator on a ship somewhere above, a man drinking coffee in a warm control room, looking at a screen and seeing a loose end that needed cutting. The ROV surged forward, its thrusters kicking up a storm of silt. The manipulator arm lashed out, the claw snapping open and shut. It wasn't trying to grab him. It was aiming for his breathing loop. It wanted to sever his air hose. Lucas kicked violently, propelling himself toward the ceiling. The claw missed his chest by inches, snagging the strap of his harness and spinning him around. He slammed into the bulkhead, the impact knocking the wind out of him. "It's trying to cut my air," Lucas yelled. The ROV corrected its pitch and turned, the camera lens zooming in. The circular saw on the second arm spun up, creating a vortex in the water. It lunged again. Lucas was cornered. He was trapped in a steel box 300 meters down with a remote-controlled assassin. He couldn't outswim it. He looked at the Broco torch still clutched in his hand. Fire. As the ROV lunged, Lucas didn't dodge. He depressed the oxygen lever on the torch handle. The magnesium rod ignited again with a blinding flash. He thrust the burning tip forward, not at the metal arm, but at the camera lens, the eye. The intense heat boiled the water instantly. The ROV operator above must have been blinded by the flare on his screen. The robot jerked backward, thrusters flaring erratically. But Lucas didn't stop. He kicked forward, driving the burning torch into the cluster of hydraulic hoses at the base of the robot's arm. Sizzle. The torch sliced through the reinforced rubber. Hydraulic fluid, a milky green cloud, exploded into the water. The claw arm went limp, dropping uselessly. The ROV panicked, or rather, its pilot did. The machine spun, the saw blade slicing wildly, carving a gouge into the chief's desk. Turned to retreat, to regroup. Lucas knew he had seconds. The pilot would switch to sonar targeting. He would come back and ram him. Lucas turned to the safe. His hands were shaking violently now, adrenaline and helium warring in his veins. Left 40, right 10, left 25. The dial felt gritty. He spun it. Click. He pulled the handle. The door was heavy, sucked shut by the vacuum of the dry air inside against the crushing water pressure. He braced his feet against the wall and pulled with everything he had. With a dull thump, the seal broke. A bubble of air escaped, wobbling upward. Inside, sitting in the dry darkness, was the yellow vinyl bag. Lucas grabbed it. He didn't check it. He shoved it into the dump pouch on the front of his dry suit and zipped it shut. The ROV was turning back. The saw blade was whining again. "I have the package," Lucas yelled. "I'm leaving. Get out of there."
Elena shouted.
Lucas didn't go back through the door. The ROV was blocking it. He looked up. The ceiling of the office had a ventilation hatch. It was small, maybe too small. He didn't care. He kicked upward, jamming his tanks through the opening. He scraped his shoulders, tearing the outer layer of his suit, but he pushed through, emerging onto the upper deck of the superstructure. Below him, inside the room, he saw the ROV smash into the safe, destroying it in a fit of mechanical rage. Lucas didn't look back. He grabbed the descent line, which was vibrating in the current. "I'm on the line," he gasped. "Ascending. Go, go." He started to climb, but he couldn't just rocket to the surface. If he did, the nitrogen and helium dissolved in his blood would expand into bubbles, turning his blood into foam. The bends. An agonizing death. He had to stop. He climbed to 150 meters. Stop. He hovered there, gripping the rope. Below him, the lights of the ROV were searching the wreck, sweeping beams of white through the darkness like searchlights from a prison tower. "They missed you," Elena said, her voice shaking. "They're searching the hull. They think you're still inside." "How long?" Lucas asked, checking his computer. The time to surface readout was blinking red. "You have a deep stop at 100 meters for 5 minutes. Elena read the tables. Then 60 meters for 10. Then the long hang at 20. 5 minutes. It sounded like nothing. In the cold, dark ocean, hanging suspended over an abyss while a killer robot hunted below. 5 minutes was an eternity. Lucas hung there. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the crushing cold. His heating suit battery was flashing low. He had used too much power during the fight. The warmth on his chest began to fade. He shivered, a violent convulsion that shook his whole body. "Lucas, talk to me," Elena said. "Stay awake." "I'm cold," he stammered. "Think about the book," she commanded. "Think about reading it to the jury. Think about Vance's face." Lucas closed his eyes. He felt the heavy lump of the dry bag against his stomach. He pictured the ink on the paper. Valve failure. Request denied. He climbed again. 100 meters. 80 meters. The water began to lighten. The pitch black turned to a deep, royal blue. At 60 meters, he looked down. The lights of the ROV were gone. But something else was happening. A shadow passed over him. Huge. Silent. He looked up. The hull of a ship was directly above him. Not the rusty gull. It was too big. A sleek, black shape cutting through the water.
Elena, Lucas whispered.
"There's a ship. Directly above me. I see it on the radar." Elena's voice was terrified. "It's the Aethelgard interceptor. They tracked the ROV signal. They're sitting right on top of us. Lucas. They're trying to cut the line." Lucas looked at the rope in his hand. It was his only way back to the rusty gull. If they cut it, he would drift away in the current, untethered, to decompress alone in the open ocean until his air ran out. "They're deploying a diver," Elena said. "I see splashdown." "Lucas, they're sending someone down to finish it." Lucas looked up at the shimmering surface. A figure was descending toward him, trailing bubbles. A man in black gear holding a spear gun. He was at 60 meters. He couldn't go up yet. He couldn't go down. He was a sitting duck. Lucas reached for his knife. It was a small 3-inch titanium blade. Against a spear gun. "I'm not dying here," Lucas growled, the anger warming him more than the suit ever could. "I'm not dying here." He released the anchor line. "Lucas, what are you doing?" "Drifting," Lucas said.
"I'm letting go."
"Pick me up down current." He kicked away from the white rope, propelling himself into the blue void. He watched as the diver descended to the spot where he had been just seconds ago, looking confused, aiming the spear gun at empty water. Lucas was free-falling in the blue, untethered, drifting with the Atlantic current. He was invisible again. But now he had no reference point. No depth gauge but his wrist computer. No way to know if he was holding depth or sinking back into the dark. "Elena," he said, staring at the empty blue expanse. "I'm drifting north. Find me." "I'm coming," she said. "Hold your depth. Don't surface. Just hold on." Lucas floated. He checked his air. The rebreather scrubber was at 15%. He clutched the book to his chest. He was a speck of dust in the universe, suspended between the crushing deep and the lethal surface. He waited for the sound of the rusty gull's engine. He waited for salvation, or for the end. And in the silence, he opened the Velcro of the dump pouch just an inch, touching the smooth plastic of the dry bag. "We got you, Chief," he thought. "We got you." The silence of the open ocean at 60 meters depth was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against Lucas Thorne's eardrums, a constant reminder of the crushing tonnage of water separating him from the air he desperately needed. He was drifting in the blue void, a solitary astronaut in inner space, untethered from the world. The anchor line was gone. The wreck was gone. There was only the rhythmic hiss-click of his rebreather and the terrified beating of his own heart. He checked his wrist computer. The numbers were dancing before his eyes, a symptom of the exhaustion clawing at his mind. He was at the 20-meter mark now, the final, agonizingly long decompression stop. He had to hang here, suspended in nothingness, for 15 minutes to let the nitrogen and helium off-gas from his bloodstream. If he surfaced now, his blood would turn into a frothy champagne of lethal bubbles, and he would die screaming on the deck of the boat. But above him, the war had already begun. Through the water, sound traveled 4 times faster than in air. Lucas could hear the churning of propellers, the deep, throaty growl of the rusty gull's diesel engine, and the high-pitched, predatory whine of the Aethelgard interceptor's turbines. They were circling each other like sharks, the sounds growing louder, overlapping into a chaotic cacophony of mechanical aggression. He looked up. The surface was a turbulent ceiling of gray light, roiling with the energy of the swell. He saw the shadow of the rusty gull pass directly overhead, her hull dark and scarred. Then, a second shadow, sleeker and longer, cut across her wake, dangerously close. The Aethelgard ship was trying to separate the mother from the child, trying to cut off Elena's approach so Lucas would be forced to surface alone, vulnerable to capture or worse. Lucas clutched the yellow dry bag against his chest. His fingers were numb inside his dry gloves, the battery in his heating suit having finally died 10 minutes ago. The cold was seeping into his core, a creeping paralysis that made his teeth chatter around the mouthpiece. "Hold on," he told himself. "Just hold on." Suddenly, 3 sharp bangs echoed through the water. Not gunshots, hulls colliding. Elena was ramming them. Lucas looked at his computer. 5 minutes left on the stop. He couldn't wait. The battle above was escalating, and if the rusty gull was disabled, he was dead anyway. He made a choice. He purged his buoyancy wing and began to kick upward, breaking the decompression ceiling. The computer screamed a digital alarm, ascent rate warning, but Lucas ignored it. He ascended through the water column, watching the gray light explode into brightness. He broke the surface in a trough between 2 6-foot waves. The air tasted of salt spray and diesel exhaust. He ripped the mouthpiece out, gasping for real, unfiltered oxygen, and spun around. The scene was chaotic. The rusty gull was 30 yards away, her engine roaring as she reversed hard, white water churning at her stern. The Aethelgard interceptor, a sleek black vessel that looked more like a missile than a boat, was turning tight, trying to broadside Elena's flank.
"Elena!"
Lucas screamed, waving his arm. On the flying bridge of the gull, Elena saw him. She didn't wave. She spun the wheel hard to starboard. The old lobster boat heaved, its steel-reinforced bow smashing through a wave as she drove straight toward him. The interceptor saw him too. The black boat corrected its course, accelerating. They were racing for him. "Come on!" Elena yelled, her voice barely audible over the wind. She cut the throttle as she neared him, drifting the boat sideways to create a lee, shielding him from the oncoming interceptor. Lucas grabbed the dive ladder with freezing hands. The weight of the rebreather pulled him down. He didn't have the strength to climb. He hung there, water thrashing around him. Elena abandoned the helm. She scrambled down to the deck, grabbed the back of his harness, and pulled with a strength born of pure adrenaline. Lucas kicked, finding purchase on the rungs, and flopped onto the deck like a landed fish. Go! Drive! Lucas choked out, rolling onto his back, clutching the bag. Elena didn't ask if he was okay. She sprinted back to the wheelhouse. The engine roared, and the rusty gull surged forward, just as the interceptor swerved to avoid a collision, missing their stern by mere feet. The wake of the larger boat hit them hard, sending tools and loose gear clattering across the deck. They're faster than us, Elena shouted down from the bridge. They're going to overtake us in 5 minutes. Lucas dragged himself into the wheelhouse, stripping off his heavy mask. He was shivering violently, his lips blue. The pain in his joints was already starting, the bends. A dull ache that would soon turn into agony. But his mind was clear. The phone, Lucas stammered, pointing to the satellite uplink unit bolted to the dash. Give me the phone. Lucas, we need to brace for impact. They're going to board us. No, they won't. Lucas grabbed the handset. He unzipped the yellow dry bag. Inside, protected from the crushing depths, was the mechanical logbook. It was dry. It was perfect. Lucas flipped it open to the page marked October 12th. The ink was dark and legible. Turn on the camera, Lucas commanded. Start the stream. Elena looked at him, then at the pursuing boat filling their rear window. She flipped the switch. The red light on the satellite unit blinked. Link established. We're live, she said. Lucas held the phone up with one shaking hand and the logbook with the other. He looked into the lens, his face pale, scarred, and wet, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. My name is Lucas Thorne, he rasped. His voice broadcast instantly to the thousands of people who had been following the story since his first video. I am on the vessel Rusty Gull. Behind me is a private security ship owned by Aethelgard Shipping. They are trying to ram us. They are trying to sink us. He held the book closer to the lens. This is the chief engineer's log from the SS Vanguard. I just pulled it from the wreck, 300 meters down. Read it. Read it. He focused the camera on the handwriting. Valve failure. Override ordered by Vance. Safety protocols bypassed. They knew. Lucas screamed into the wind, the tears mixing with the seawater on his face. They killed 24 people to save a schedule, and now they're trying to kill us to hide it. Everyone watching this, record it, share it. Do not let them delete this. On the Aethelgard interceptor, the pilot must have received a call. Or perhaps he saw the phone. The black boat, which had been closing in for a final strike, suddenly slowed. It veered off, peeling away in a wide arc. They knew. The world was watching. If they touched the gull now, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be murder on live television. Elena watched them retreat on the radar. She slumped over the wheel, letting out a breath that sounded like a sob. Lucas dropped the phone. He curled up on the floor of the wheelhouse, clutching the book to his chest. The pain in his joints was screaming now, a fire in his elbows and knees. We did it, he whispered, darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. Chief, we did it. Then the exhaustion took him and the world faded to black. The courtroom in the Southern District of New York was a cathedral of mahogany and marble, designed to make human beings feel small in the presence of the law. But on this day, 3 months later, the silence in the room was not one of intimidation, but of anticipation. The gallery was packed. Reporters, maritime union representatives, families of the Vanguard victims, they sat shoulder to shoulder. In the front row, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, Lucas's mother, sat holding Elena Rossi's hand. Lucas sat in the witness box. He looked different. The scars on his face had faded to thin white lines. He wore a suit that fit him properly this time, but his eyes were older. He sat with a stillness that unnerved the defense attorneys. He was no longer the frantic mechanic. He was the survivor. On the evidence table, sealed in a vacuum bag, lay the logbook. It looked ancient and battered, a relic from another world. Julian Vance sat at the defense table. He was pale, his expensive suit looking slightly too large for him, as if he had shrunk under the weight of the indictment. He refused to look at Lucas. "Mr. Thorne," the district attorney asked, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "Can you read the entry from October 12th, 1400 hours? For the record?" Lucas reached out. His hand didn't shake. He opened the book. He didn't need to read it. He had memorized every curve of Miller's handwriting. Pressure in turbine 3 critical. Relief valve seized. Request for immediate shutdown sent to HQ. Reply received from Director Vance. Maintain speed. Bypass governors. Schedule priority. Lucas paused. He looked up, his gaze boring into Vance. "I am ordering the crew to wear life vests." Lucas read the final line, his voice thick with emotion. "If we don't make it, let this book be our witness. The ship didn't fail us. The company did." A stifled sob broke from the gallery. It was the widow of Jack, the young oiler. The defense attorney stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Objection. This is emotional manipulation. The chain of custody of that book is—" "The chain of custody," the judge interrupted, peering over her glasses, "involves a man diving into an abyss and fighting off a remote-operated vehicle. An event corroborated by satellite footage and sonar logs. Overruled. The evidence stands. The trial lasted 2 weeks, but in truth it ended in that moment. The logbook was a hammer that shattered every lie Aethelgard had constructed. The digital forensic team, emboldened by the logbook, finally managed to recover deleted fragments from the company servers that matched Miller's notes perfectly. When the verdict came, it wasn't a surprise, but it was a shockwave. We find the defendant, Aethelgard Shipping, guilty on 24 counts of corporate manslaughter. We find the defendant, Julian Vance, guilty of fraud, obstruction of justice, and negligent homicide. Vance closed his eyes. The handcuffs clicked. A sharp, mechanical sound that echoed the closing of the safe door in Lucas's memory. But the real victory wasn't the sound of the gavel. It was 6 months later. Lucas stood on a wooden pier in Chesapeake Bay. The winter wind was biting, but he didn't mind. He liked the cold now. It reminded him he was alive. He wasn't a mechanic anymore. He couldn't go back to the engine rooms. The noise was too much. He was working as a safety inspector for the union, teaching young cadets how to spot the dangers their bosses wanted them to ignore. He heard footsteps on the wood. Elena walked up beside him. She looked better too. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by a sharp, clear vitality. She was practicing law again, heading a new firm dedicated to maritime rights. "Big day," she said, handing him a coffee. "Yeah," Lucas said. He held up a newspaper. The headline read, "Congress passes Vanguard ACT." The subtext detailed the new laws. Mandatory, independent black boxes for all commercial vessels. Real-time satellite monitoring of critical systems. Whistleblower protections that were ironclad. "It's named after the ship," Elena said softly. "But it's really named after Miller. And you." "I didn't do it for a law," Lucas said, looking out at the gray water. "I did it so Jack's mom could sleep at night, so they wouldn't think their sons were incompetent. You changed the world, Lucas. A little bit, but enough." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, brass object. It was a pressure gauge, an old analog one he had salvaged from the Rusty Gull before they sold her. He looked at the water. It was calm today. The monsters were gone. "I still dream about it," Lucas admitted. "The water, the dark." "So do I," Elena said. "But we woke up. That's the difference." Lucas smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. "Yeah, we woke up." He threw the brass gauge into the water. It splashed and sank, spiraling down into the deep. But this time it wasn't a tragedy. It was an offering, a message to Elias Miller, resting in the quiet dark 300 meters down. "We told them, Chief. We told them everything. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a path of glittering gold across the waves. Lucas turned his back on the ocean and began to walk back toward the land, toward Elena, toward a life that, finally, belonged to him. The Vanguard would remain at the bottom of the sea, rusting into oblivion. But the truth she carried had surfaced, and in the end, that was the only buoyancy that mattered.